Hey guys, Ryan here at Signature Edits, and inside this video we are going to go over 3 simple things you can do to instantly improve your photography. Are you ready? Let's do it. Alright, so we're going to go through a few sample images together, and I'm going to show you some common mistakes that I see that are so easy to tweak, so easy to change, and if you take these things and you apply them to your photography, you will see instant improvement. So they're simple, they're basic, but after I point them out, you will probably be like, why wasn't I doing this before? So first off, we've got this image in front of us. We're going to get into it right away. Obviously, you can see that it was shot pretty underexposed. I'm having to increase the exposure probably by about 1.5 stops just to get it looking normal. Now, simply by underexposing your images, you're going to lose a lot of dynamic range, a lot of detail. There's going to be other issues too. And so let me show you, if you go up into Lightroom and you look at the actual camera settings, you can see exactly what this image was shot at. It was on a 35mm lens on f1.8 at 1/80th of a second. Now, the problem with that 1/80th of a second as well is when you're shooting with shutter speeds that are so slow, you're going to have even more blur, even more loss of detail, because that fraction of a second, if someone is moving, you're going to lose that crispness. So you never want to shoot with a super low shutter speed like that. It would have been so much easier just to raise the ISO on this image. It would have been way more clean. You would have had way more dynamic range by properly exposing it in the first place. But all of these things are not even what I want to point out as tip number 1. And tip number 1 is, do you notice anything in this photo that could be better, or anything that's maybe a little distracting? Let me add some contrast so it's not quite so terrible and adjust the white balance. Now, what I'm hoping you're picking up on is the stuff going on in the background. So what's in your image, the focus of your image, we want that to be as strong as possible. When you're taking a photo of somebody or a scene, whatever it is, we want to minimize distractions. We really want the viewer of our photography to know exactly what it was that we intended them to look at, what the subject is, and everything else that takes away from that, we want to get rid of. And that really is affected by your background. Now let's look at the background of this image. We've got the groom here who's just putting on his jacket or his shirt, and this is great. However, in the background we have so much distracting stuff. We have this t-shirt over here. We've got these ugly light switches over here. We've got a backpack, it looks like, on the couch, shorts on the couch, leftover plate of nachos, granola bars, papers, all of these things. And had the photographer, when they arrived at the scene, simply grabbed these things, moved them out of the way, that in itself would have made an extraordinary difference to the quality of this shot, in addition to some other things. Now, the second thing I want to point out about this image that's really important is you can see how little contrast there is around the groom here, around his hair, around his face. We're losing a ton of contrast because of this window in behind. Now, what's really ironic here is that this shot was shot super dark, but it didn't need to be dark. All the photographer needed to do was actually just move around and shoot it from the other direction, taking use and making use of this gigantic, beautiful window. There's going to be nothing better in terms of lighting than natural light. So if they had simply gone over to where this couch is, they A, wouldn't have had to even clean this up, but B, would have had this really nice window light properly exposed on the groom and his best man over here. Okay, so that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about. It's when you are taking a photo, you need to focus on all of the details that are taking away or adding to the image. If it's taking away, do your best to get rid of it, crop it out, whatever it is. When you have a big light source, you also want to take advantage of that, because the problem is that if we actually look closely here, we're losing so much contrast simply because the window is blowing things out, and we're going to have such issues when it comes to actually getting the skin tones looking properly, that's not a word, but all of this because the tungsten lights are still on in this room, even though we have this nice big beautiful window simply moving. Use your feet, use your mind, really think about the basics. It's the basics that make the photo. If you get all of these basics right, it's going to make such a huge difference. It's not about these top secret techniques, it's just doing the simple things right, doing the foundational things right. Now let's look at another image from the same exact set. So let me just straighten this so you don't go crazy looking at crooked lines. It's still crooked, and you can see that's because this photo was taken off center. So if you're going to be shooting anything that actually has geometry, anything that has straight lines or lines that are supposed to be straight in it, you always want to shoot those straight on, because otherwise you're going to get this weird warping. Now inside of Lightroom, we can actually go down to lens corrections, enable these profile corrections, go into transform, press auto, and it will look for these lines and try and straighten them for us. So you can see that it's done a pretty good job. Most of these lines are reasonably straight, but we still haven't been able to totally counter exactly what was wrong in the first place. Anyways, that's not the point of this image. What I wanted to focus on are these ugly tungsten lights. Now the lights themselves, I don't really have a problem with them, but the issue I do have is when you turn this down, you can see that we've got this really weird color cast on his shirt. If you look really closely, we're going to try and zoom in here. On his shirt, we've got like this red, this orange, we've got blue streaks in the shadows of his shirt. And the reason that we have all of these colors, it's a plethora of color on his shirt, is because we have this big window over here. Remember from our last shot, we've got this big window bringing light into the room, but we've also got these tungsten lights on. And the tungsten lights, when we zoom in, you can see that they're very orange, very yellow, which is fine if that's all that is lighting the room, because we can color correct for that using our white balance tool. But the problem is, if we color correct for those and make them look normal, then all of a sudden our groom here is looking pretty blue, because we have the window light, which is way higher in Kelvin. It's 5400. These tungsten lights are 3400. And so we have this really weird kind of color cast going on. And I see this all the time because photographers forget to shut off the overhead light. So when you first arrive at a location, whether it's for a wedding or a portrait shoot, whatever, you want to avoid, whenever you can, mixing light. Unless it's done really intentionally, stylistically, and you've got a specific vision in mind, you don't want to be mixing light where we have some tungsten on his face, some daylight. That's just going to make things look really unnatural and give a weird color cast to our image. So, in addition to that, you can see our first point carries over. Watch the background. Look at all of the stuff that is down here. It would have been so easy just when you first arrived at this location to take this stuff, move it, put it away, and shut off the TV. No sense having that really glaring background right there. Had that been shut off, it still would have been, not perfectly beautiful. However, it would have been far less distracting and would have lent more to this image rather than having all of these distractions, these overhead lights, this TV, the Xbox controllers, the hangers, all of that stuff. Really would have cleaned up the image by doing that and by shooting again straight on, because when it's shot crooked like this, there's only so much you can do and it's going to mess with your eyes as well. Okay, let's jump over to our next image. And this one is an illustration of what you should do if you arrive at a wedding, an event, whatever it is, and the lighting conditions are not really great. So the reason I show you this image is because it's a pretty decent image. The lighting is nice. We've got an overcast day, so things are reasonably soft. But really, what's ironic is that where this guy got ready was in this house over here. Now, the house looks like this. Had the photographer simply gotten the guys to move outside, the photos would have been so much better. The lighting was better, there was more room, there was less distracting backgrounds, it's prettier. Everything would have been better if that photographer had simply taken control of the situation and said, hey guys, I'm loving what you're doing. I'm wondering if we can just move it outside for 15 minutes here as you guys button up your shirts, and we'll get some photos there because the light is going to be a lot better. Had they simply taken control and taken that initiative and really just found the best possible spot and moved those guys to it, she wouldn't even have needed to clean up. They could have just moved the groom, moved the guys, and taken some great photos. Would have been so much better. So that's the reason that photo is in there. Tip number 3, I suppose, is to take control of the situation, of the shoot. You're the photographer, you're the professional, and don't be afraid to explain to people. You don't want to be bossy, but you can say, hey, this will be so much better if we could just move outside for a couple of minutes. It can be a compromise. They don't have to get ready the entire time. In this one spot outside, they want to put on their pants inside, that's fine. But afterwards, just the final touches, move outside, that would have been way better in this specific situation. Okay, now the very last thing that I want to show you is, again, focusing on the background and what takes away from the image. So we look at this photo right here. It's pretty good, right? We've got some nice color. Things are well exposed. We've got a decent composition here. Let me tell you 2 things that I think really would have been helpful in making this photo better. The first is a little bit of extra room. We don't want to crop out her dress, but we've lost that. You can always crop in later. Always shoot a little wider than you need to, because you can always crop in. You can never crop out. Now, the second thing is just the overall composition and the background would have been better if the camera had either been a little bit lower to the ground, or they had simply moved the composition. So the photographer, let's say they're standing here, had moved over here and shot in this direction. And the reason for that is in the background, we had this great, huge lawn, this really bright green lawn. And as great as the photo is, it would have been so much better if they had either lowered their camera so that there was less lawn and more of these trees in the background, more of those beautiful bokeh balls, whatever, or if they'd simply moved over here and there was less grass in the background and more of these darker tones, because you're going to focus more on the couple if there's more contrast in the background. A nice dark background is going to add as much as possible to it. Let me show you a contrasting image. So this photo was taken in that other direction I just talked about, and it's much more aesthetically pleasing. Whether or not the actual pose, the photo is better, obviously it's a slightly different lens, but it's just to illustrate when we have this big grassy area versus simply moving, simply rotating makes a big difference. So take control of your situations, be conscious of the background and everything that is taking away from the photo. We always want to be watching for those things. What can we do? Oftentimes it's as simple as just moving over or lowering your camera or turning off the overhead lights or cleaning up the background or moving outside. Whatever it is, as a photographer, take control of the situation. Don't be afraid to do that. That's okay. And after all, people are hiring you because you are an expert. So don't be afraid to use your expertise to take control of the situation and just to make things the best that they can be. As a photographer, the last thing you want to do is rush yourself and pressure yourself and just shoot without thinking. You want to take a step back. You want to take a breath. Feel free to do so and ask yourself, okay, how can I make this the best it can be? Because that's going to give you a way better result than just rushing and praying that things work out, okay? So that's it for today. Just a couple of really quick tricks that will instantly improve your photography. Just those basic things. Mastering the fundamentals is going to get you so much more mileage than the next Lightroom trick or the next editing thing. If you can really master these things, get the photos right in camera, it's going to make everything about editing so much easier. When it comes to actually applying your presets, getting the look that you want, it's going to be so much easier because your photo is already well exposed. All you have to do is just dial things in, grab your preset, adjust the exposure, and things are good to go. So if this video was helpful for you, do me a big favor, hit that like button for me. Don't forget to subscribe for more great content, tutorials, and resources, and leave a comment for me below if you want more videos like this, or if you have other tips that have really made a huge difference in your photography and are just basic things to apply. I'd love to hear about those. Finally, if you're interested in this free preset that I just applied from our Clean and Classic pack, I will leave a link to that in the description below, so make sure to check that out, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.